For today's video, I want to talk a little bit more about designing content in live service games. With the upcoming releases of Path of Exile 2, Marvel Rivals, and some of the issues I've been seeing with games like Limbus Company, I want to talk a little bit more about what makes content evergreen, why it's very important, and why it's a huge pain in the butt to keep a live service game going for months and years on end. If you're not familiar with the term evergreen, this refers to content that it has no real expiration date. It's going to be as useful, as informative, and as important to know whether it is the day after it's released, to months, years, decades, whatever. If we talk about the opposite of this would be like something like top boss fights circa February of 2011. Doesn't really help us right now. And when it comes to live service design, understanding how to create content that keeps people coming back for more while not angering or frustrating people who just started the game is very important. Because for every new piece of a new champion, a new gun, a new 6-star, UR, SSR, whatever, the gap between those who just started the game and those who've been playing it for since day one gets wider. And while you may not think that this matters for like a single player or a non-competitive game, it does matter for someone wanting to try a new game. That they go to play and they realize, hey, all this amazing and cool and amazing free stuff, well, guess what? That was for the first month of release, or that was for the limited time winter solstice event, and you can't get it anymore, so tough luck. And as a developer, again, you want to design alluring and attractive content. That's what gets people to play your game and, of course, gets them to spend lots and lots of money. But figuring out what is the best kind of content for a game and how this gets balanced going forward is incredibly difficult. A lot of people, when they think about mobile live service games, they still think about like the early 2010s, where the most popular stuff were cosmetics. A fancy new house, new tie, hats, lots and lots of hats. And don't forget premium skins. And while premium skins and that kind of, peacocking effect is very effective as a monetization, it doesn't drive long-term interest in your game. It has to be something qualitative, something that adds to the experience. This is why when we talk about the first major successes of live service, Team Fortress and League of Legends, both added in gameplay-changing content. Team Fortress had the different sideway weapons, and this eventually evolved into the whole Manco system, on top again of the numerous cosmetics. League of Legends, again, premium skins, but they of course had new champions coming at a frequent basis. And that right there takes us to the challenge of the first challenge, I should say, of live service. How does someone new get into your game? For every one of you right now who plays a CCG style game online, Marvel Snap, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, whatever, and you've been playing it for a long time, I'm talking at least a few years, I have a question for you. What do you think it's like to play this game starting right now? You don't have months of cards and resources. You are a brand new player circa right now, 2024. For a lot of these games, it is like hell to try and play them. Dead by Daylight is a good example of this. The thing about live service, regardless of the genre and the studio, is that as the game goes on, new content is just really, really cool. As the developer gets more comfortable working with the game, more comfortable with kind of changing the meta, adding new and interesting things are really cool to use. When we look at something like Limbus Company, which I'll be coming back to in a few minutes, there are kind of very first, 3-star characters that are introduced are just kind of like, this character does bleed. This character does rupture. Okay. Today, their best characters have a small story in terms of what their skills and passives do, as anyone who got Air King Heathcliff can certainly attest. And this is good. You want to see things growing and changing. That is the MO of live service. But what is it like for someone new trying to play these games, whether it is a single player, cooperative, or competitive? In Dead by Daylight, the tutorial for that game is woefully out of date. I remember when I tried this about like 2 years ago, I was like, okay, learn how the Trapper plays. Yeah, that's great. Here's all the other killers with all their unique rules and systems and how they work and how the perks work and how things have changed on that whole front. The tutorial doesn't do anything with that. So you go to play the game for the first time and you are pretty much kind of thrown into the wilderness, quite literally in this case, and forced to fend for yourselves. And it's why these games, especially competitive driven games, have tremendous churn from new players. You start playing the game, you run to someone who has years of characters, cards, guns, whatever, and you get face stomped. You really want to play that game again? Do you really want to give money to that game over and over again? And this is why, when it comes to live service design and content, that you need to be mindful as to what does a new player experience today, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and why a lot of games will try to create content that is not going to widen that gap or provide means for players to catch up. Some good examples of this is probably from Arknights. I would say of all the mobile and live service games I've played, Arknights has perhaps the most generous and easiest way of getting new people into it, despite the fact that I think the game is now 4 or 5 years old at the moment. As of I'm recording this in the beginning of December, they just redid their whole kind of new player welcome kit to that game. They're giving everyone, the starter banner a free 6-star, and they updated the starting banner for more relative operators today, rather than just using the same, I think it was 4 picks from when the game first came out. They even gave new players a free 6-star selector as well, which is incredibly generous of the 6 that they chose for that, or I think it's 4. The other thing that Arknights does really well, it is the only live service game, at least in this respect, that I've seen, where the progression is still capped. And it's capped relatively low compared to a lot of the other ones that we've played. And again, Limbus Company that we'll talk about next. The max a character can reach is Elite 290, which for those of you who don't play Arknights, that doesn't really mean much. But to get a character to that point, once you've kind of entered the mid to late game of playing Arknights, doesn't take all that much. It will take some grinding and farming, yes, but it's not a case where you're going to need to get a character to that level. Because Arknights features a kind of very, sliding scale for how stats are distributed as you level up, it's not a case where E260 versus E270 is as, oh my god, crazy deal of power escalation. This is something that we see from a lot of other mobile games, especially the idle variety, where just going up 10 levels is a huge deal. In Arknights, it's maybe 30 levels a piece that you'll see a pretty, I would say, substantial improvement. But it doesn't take a lot to get a character to that level. And what this means for developing and balancing content in the game is that the power curve is not as crazily high as some of the other games that we've played. Getting to see or experience the story chapters in Arknights, they don't require you to have a fully ranked, fully promoted team of 6-star operators. Again, when I cover this game in my monetization review, you can do a lot in that game using the free 3 and 4-star characters. There are tons and tons of videos and guides of people doing just that. You don't need to spend to fully get max potential in every operator to get the best out of them, unless you're going for some kind of super crazy, low optimized or super optimized build. And what this means for the content, both story and kind of bonus stuff in Arknights, is that it stays evergreen day in and year out. Anytime they release a new side story and stuff like that, once it's finished, it gets added to kind of like this collection of side stories that you can experience anytime you want. The only times that it really matters is when a event is reran. That gets you bonus resources. But if you're just in this for the story-based content and see what is going on, you don't need to wait for that. You can experience that anytime and anywhere that you would choose. And while there is, of course, kind of like the super masochistic levels of kind of like the end missions for each event, if you just want to see the story, you don't need the very best. You don't even need like averagely best for that. And this is done explicitly to make sure that if you are a new player or just starting out player, you are not going to be handicapped to experience the story of Arknights. Whereas with a lot of other mobile live service games, a lot of free players will have that wall that, hey, you didn't get fully potential characters to balance your whole team out, get the hell out, you're not going to make any progress. Or you didn't buy the latest, meta gun or meta character, well, now you're worthless to multiplayer. Arknights is very fair in that respect, and is again helped by the fact that a lot of their content in that respect stays evergreen. With that said, it still has some faults when it comes to the power scaling of different operators. Again, a 6-star operator released 3 years ago, and a 6-star operator released today is very different in terms of its utility. But the content itself is not being balanced on those new operators. Again, as a very important point for anyone who's working on a live service game, you cannot balance your content around someone having literally everything. And that takes me to where Limbus Company is kind of falling into some issues when it comes to providing content for everyone involved. So right now in Limbus Company, we just wrapped up, I think we're on Canto 7. And this Canto, I think above all else, really showed a power disparity between people who are going to just start figuring out the game now and those who have been here since the beginning. If you're a Limbus Company fan watching this video right now, let me know in the comments down below if you've been a Battle Pass supporter since day one. And if you have been, do you have access to everything, or at least have access to what's considered meta? More than likely you do. As I've said, I've been getting the Battle Pass for the Limbus Company since day one. I think I've spent, a grand total, maybe like $40, $50 total in the game since its inception. I, at this moment, have almost everything. The only two things I'm missing right now is the latest ego for Heathcliff and Sinclair at the moment, which is 2 out of a whole, and I do mean a whole lot of things that you could be spending money on. If I need a character or a specific debuff or whatever, it's kind of like a billionaire going to his fancy garage filled with like 6-7 figure cars and going, oh, I don't know which one to take out today. The issue that Limbus Company has in this respect is that it's building its content around this kind of continued power scaling. It is rare for a lot of mobile live service games to have kind of the progression growing with the story, and that's what Limbus Company is doing. The characters grow in power, so they raise the max level. They raise the uptie or promotion of different characters. This is great in terms of, again, tying gameplay to the story. But it again is raising this issue for someone new trying to play this game. And you see, this gets at the issue when it comes to gacha design in this respect. And again, something that even Arknights has that problem with. If I'm trying to play this game circa 2024, 2025, 2026, whatever, I generally want the most up-to-date or current characters. Again, a character release 3 years into a game's life is going to probably be better or more interesting than a character release month 1. But as the pool of characters grow, and as content grows, it becomes harder and harder to get those specific characters. And again, someone will chime in here and argue, well, I can beat every single piece of content in Arknights and Limbus Limitations, or I can play Dead by Daylight with just basic characters, no perks, and I can do this blindfolded with one hand tied behind my back. But again, the challenge of live service design and designing content for live service is to keep the disparity between people who just started this game and people who've been playing it as narrow and as small as possible. Because if you just focus on your hardcore fan base, if you just say screw it to anyone new joining this game, you have officially put a kind of countdown timer on the life cycle of your game. Because if new people aren't joining, it means for every veteran player who stops playing your game, that is permanent income and interest gone. And we've seen this with a lot of live service games where it is horrible to try and play this game after 3 years, 2 years, sometimes even after a few months of playing. Especially if the game embraces and sells power. That if month 1 or week 1, someone could just spend $50 and get one of the top characters on the entire game, what is it like to try and play against that person a few months down the line? And with Limbus Company, again, it's that issue where it's becoming harder and harder to get characters that you need for specific content. And as new content gets introduced in that game, especially the mirror dungeons and refraction railways, they go away. So if someone wants to experience kind of like a beginner railway challenge, that's not available. And it is good that Project Moon evolves as content and adds new stuff. But this gets at the problem of FOMO, aka fear of missing out. And this is incredibly true of any game that has battle passes, seasonal play, seasonal content. That if I miss one season of your game, how much did I just actually miss out? How many resources, skins, guns, characters, emotes, sneakers, belts, hats, that I will never get access to because that Battle Pass content is gone? A lot of games will do that. I know Fortnite is very guilty of this, that when a new season comes, all the old stuff gets thrown out the window. One thing that I like about Dead by Daylight is that the story base, I forget the name of it, that they call their stuff. I think chapters, I think there's another term for it. Those specific challenges stay available forever. The only thing that goes away is the specific battle pass. And that is still, it's not as big of a knife in the back. It's more maybe like a half knife in your back. One of the things I was hearing about with Marvel Rivals is that if someone wants to buy the Battle Pass whenever, it stays accessible. And that, I think, is the best interpretation, or the best version of this. Because the point that I want to instill in everyone for today's video is that good content in a live service game stays viable whether it is month 1, year 1, decade 1 of your game. A bad example of this is, of course, Destiny 2, where a lot of its story-based content is quite literally not available. You can't play it or access it. Yes, you can maybe get the weapon or the exotic of it, but all the story, all the cutscene, all the narration that ties into this greater world, it's out. And someone, if a Destiny fan is watching this right now, they may argue in the comments saying, but Josh, is it fair to expect the developer to keep this content available and supported for everyone? And the answer to that is, hell yeah, it is. It should be required. Because again, if you want to get people to play your game, no one wants to play a game where half or more of that content just doesn't exist. It's not available. And everyone who was there previously has an innate advantage. It feels really bad in that respect. And it's why for a lot of live service games, they do have that expiration date where, okay, no one new is playing, and now all of our old players are quitting. What do we do? For the final part of this video, I want to give some advice and tips about designing evergreen content in this respect. You want, in a way, to try and create some kind of baseline that goes with the progression of your title. And you want to make sure that players are given the ability and the options to progress. I would honestly suggest, when it comes to gacha design, that one of the more interesting, it's still evil, but it's genius evil examples of this, is Marvel Contest of Champions. In the game, their entire gacha system is tied to their story progression. I said this before in an earlier video, that when you start playing Contest of Champions, you can take out your credit card and say, here, charge whatever you want on it. I just want all the resources now. The game will literally not sell you 5 to 6 star characters on a new account. You have to get, every time you beat a major act or, the chunk of story in the game, they upgrade your kind of profile and your title, which affects which banners you have access to, which shards and currencies you can get. And it ties this in a way that when you start playing that game, you're going to use 2 to 3 star characters for the very first chapter or very first act, because you won't get access to anything else. But the insidiousness of this is that because content is going to be kind of content lock or star lock based on which characters that you have, getting a really good 4 star and then by proxy a really good 5 and 6 star character can rapidly advance your progress through this game. Because all the content, all the bonus missions in this game has kind of low quality characters, good account quality characters, great character, and then super whale, you've gotten every single best character in the game, rewards for it. And what they do is that it's not a case of, if I'm a new character and I do the super easy content, maybe I'll get a 4 star shard or a 5 star shard. No. You only get 2 to 3 stars. If you want actual account progress in Contest of Champions, you have to do the hard stuff. But if you don't have good characters for that hard stuff, it's kind of like trying to beat up a tank with a spork. And if for those of you who've seen footage of the game, you may think that it's very easy to play it, but no. You see, when they raise the difficulty of the game, they give more characters crazier and more just obnoxious buffs and perks. It's like, okay, playing the easier version of this character or against this character, their buff could be, okay, they move a little bit faster or they punch a little bit harder. On the hard variant of that, it's, okay, this character has a constant universal debuff that if you are not within 2 feet of this character, you gain frailty. And every frailty stack on you, the boss heals additional health and their attack goes up 300% per fragility stack. And if you punch the character with the wrong class type, they'll gain super repose and they'll immediately do 700% of unblockable, unhealable damage to your character, so you're dead. And there's not much you can do about that. You need, when you're building your live service content, when you're building new content, you want to be thinking about how someone can approach this who doesn't have the top 5 meta characters circa 2023, December 7th at exactly 6:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you're going to start having content that is going to be balanced or assumed to be balanced around the better characters, then you need to provide players with a means of catching up. I would honestly start thinking about having, if we're going to have like a gacha game or built around kind of evolution, like with Limbus Company, that maybe their ability to pull or which characters a player can get access to should be dependent on where they're in the story mode. Pulling, again, like a Season 6 character, or I'm sorry, Canto 6, Canto 7 character in Limbus Company will do a whole lot if you're just starting the game and you're on the very first Kanto. But if you're pulling a Kanto 1, Kanto 2, 3 star and you're trying to do something right now, you are in for a colossal amount of pain. And the name of that pain currently are unbreakable coins, which is as big of a FU, I think, to new players as one can get for a game. And we don't have the time. This video is already getting long enough to go into why it's such a pain to deal with for a new player. But to wrap things up for today, live service content is always about this push and pull between creating something that is new and fancy and shiny and powerful, and making sure that your game doesn't hinge on it for the next 3 to 7 years of its livelihood. People don't want to join a game that they feel that the power curve is too large for them to even have any chance of accomplishing anything with it. And again, that works for both competitive and just single-player design. When you're building new story-driven content, new events, new chapters, whatever, you don't want to be thinking about, okay, let's build this for our whales, over the person who has the perfect meta team available. Because you are making a very small, accessible piece of content. Again, the best content in any game is something that can be experienced by as many people as you can, and more importantly, it can be reran or is used for as many months and years of that game being out. You don't want to create something that is only going to be available, only going to be worthwhile for 2 weeks. The very worst thing that you can do for creating new content is making it so it is only going to be worth it for someone who's playing the game right now for 14 days. Not only is that bad for new players showing, but that is murder for your designers. Hey, we want you to focus and rush this new content out, and only people who will play for the next 14 days will ever experience it. And then can you do that again, and again, and again for every month for the next 10 years of this game? Thanks, let me know when it's all done. Good content, again, it excites people. It is the driving force of your monetization, your live service design, and you want it to be as alluring for someone who is just starting to play your game now, as someone who is going to be playing your game for months and years and has everything else. And it's also why you want to have a kind of endpoint for the power curve of your game. Because anytime you raise that power curve, everything else in your game gets pushed down. Dragon Ball Legends is a good example of this with its infinity versions of Goku in it. That in about, I think, like the last 2 years, they added a new rarity tier. So if you missed out on those characters when they came out and you're just starting to play, good luck trying to survive multiplayer against someone who has every single character and every single Ultra character and every single Ultra version of Goku in it. You are not going to survive. And if you don't survive, you're probably not going to stick around. And some developers will say, well, okay, who cares? Or were they really going to spend money on this game? I'm just going to put out another ultra limited, ultra rare character that has a 0.0006% chance to come out. And that can work for a time. But it will always lead to this downward spiral that old players are leaving, no one else is coming. And if you have no one else coming to your game, guess what? It will eventually die. And if people see that you are being very exploitive with your monetization, with your content, with your gacha, they are not going to be jumping onto your next game or the one after that. So, for those of you watching, here's our question for today's video. What are good examples of evergreen content that you like in a live service game? It doesn't have to be a single player or multiplayer, cooperative, competitive, just anything in general. What do you like to see that goes beyond just creating the super fancy, amazing, hyperactive 8-star character that's only going to be viable for 2 weeks? And when for a game that you play that you stopped enjoying, did they have that moment where they kind of, crossed the Rubicon of unethical monetization and design? Let me know about that. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and see everyone in the next video. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.